They didn't set the fastest lap. They didn't make any bold statements. But what Mercedes showed on day 2 of testing was terrifying in a completely different way. While the rest of the grid scrambled through red flags, wet conditions, and mechanical gremlins, George Russell just kept going. Lap after lap. No issues. No drama. No noise. But the data? That's where the silence starts to feel dangerous. Because according to internal reports, Mercedes wasn't chasing headlines. They were running something far more valuable, a full race sim, under race fuel, on medium tires. And the W17 behaved like it was already in mid-season form. If that car is as stable as it looked in Barcelona, then Mercedes may have quietly built the most complete machine of 2026. Before anyone even realized it. And if Red Bull and Ferrari aren't worried yet, they should be. Barcelona in January isn't exactly the most forgiving environment. Cold air, a green track, and early morning damp patches still lingering from overnight mist. It's the kind of day where most teams wait it out, fine-tune in the garage, play it safe. But not Mercedes. They were the first to roll out. No flashy launch. No press parade. Just George Russell in the W17, ready to work. And that first hour? It told us more than any press release could. While others dipped in and out of the pit lane, struggling with balance or temperature windows, Russell ran long. 20 laps. Then 30. Then over 50, without even changing tire compounds. It wasn't a glory run. It wasn't for the cameras. It was something much more dangerous for the rest of the grid, controlled, repeatable data collection. What stood out wasn't top speed, it was predictability. Sector times weren't fluctuating. Braking points were stable. The W17 wasn't snapping under load or porpoising at high speed like we saw back in 2022. It looked planted. And for a team that spent 2 years chasing stability, that matters more than any lap time ever could. More importantly, the car didn't overreact to changing conditions. As track temperature rose and wind picked up down the main straight, the W17's balance stayed neutral. No dramatic understeer, no sudden snap oversteer on corner exit. That kind of behavior doesn't happen by accident, especially on a brand new concept car. It suggests something much deeper, something fundamentally right in the architecture. And while Red Bull remained behind closed doors for most of the morning, Mercedes just kept cycling through long runs. No low fuel stints. No aggressive engine modes. Just lap after lap of clean, uninterrupted data. It was the kind of run plan you only execute when you're not worried about reliability at all. And that's what should concern their rivals the most. By mid-afternoon, the W17 had logged more kilometers than any other car on the grid. Not a single mechanical failure. Not a single on-track error. And behind the scenes, team engineers reportedly flagged a key metric internally. Their degradation curve was flatter than expected, especially on the medium compound. That's the kind of feedback that makes strategists start to smile. So while headlines focused on sector times and Hadjar's crash at turn 10, Mercedes quietly did something far more important. They built confidence. And in the early days of a brand new formula, confidence can be deadly. And this is where things start to get uncomfortable. Because while Mercedes looked calm, too calm, not everything added up. Yes, Russell logged more laps than anyone. Yes, the W17 looked balanced. But the longer you stared at the data, the more something strange started to emerge. Not in the speed, but in the way the car was being driven. Telemetry picked up something subtle. Russell was never pushing through the final 20% of throttle application. Across multiple laps, even on the main straight, there was a deliberate delay in full power delivery. That's not something you do unless you're hiding something either about your engine or your aero. And if you're Mercedes, and you've already seen what Red Bull can do with floor-generated downforce, you might just want to keep certain secrets hidden even from GPS overlays. Observers in the paddock noticed it too. The car sounded slightly muted through turn 3, not underpowered, just held back. And yet, even without full deployment, the W17 looked glued to the tarmac. That's a dangerous combination. Because it means the team is gathering real data under fake conditions and planning to unleash the full picture only when it truly matters. Insiders say Mercedes was running a flat aero map, a configuration designed not for performance, but for data calibration. But here's the catch. Even with that flat map, they still matched the long-run pace of Red Bull's morning session. And Red Bull wasn't holding back. Which raises a troubling question. If this is Mercedes at 70%, what happens when they decide to run at 100? And this isn't speculation. Because multiple teams reportedly flagged Mercedes' long-run degradation curve to the FIA's on-site analysts. Not because it broke any rules, but because the numbers didn't align with what's physically expected. Lower drop-off, tighter deltas, and better thermal retention than any of the other 2026 prototypes. It was efficient too efficient. But the real concern? Mercedes didn't react to anyone else's pace. They didn't switch strategy when Red Bull went for a time attack. They didn't respond when Ferrari adjusted rear suspension geometry. They stayed locked into their run plan like they already knew what the others were trying to find out. And when a team behaves that way, it usually means one thing. They're already ahead. So now the question becomes, was this composure, or was it calculated misdirection? Because Mercedes may not have shown us the real W17. They may have shown us exactly what they wanted everyone else to see, while the true performance waits quietly beneath the surface. At first glance, it all looked clean. No rule breaking. No suspicious modifications. But when the FIA quietly requested Mercedes to submit additional sensor data after day 2, the mood in the paddock shifted. Not because something was obviously illegal, but because it wasn't clear what Mercedes had actually done. And that ambiguity? That's where Formula One gets dangerous. What raised eyebrows was Mercedes' approach to their floor flex pattern. Observers noticed the W17 was absorbing curb impacts far better than expected. Especially in the final sector, where most teams struggle with underbody porpoising. The car remained stable, predictable, and planted, without showing visible signs of flex or movement. But engineers from two rival teams privately questioned how Mercedes achieved that level of compliance, without triggering floor deflection limits. Now, this isn't the first time Mercedes has operated in a gray zone. Remember the DAS system in 2020, the dual-axis steering that was technically legal, until it wasn't? That innovation changed how the paddock viewed Mercedes, not just fast, but politically fearless. And if they found a new mechanical solution, a hidden flex joint, a material that behaves differently under load, it could explain the FIA's renewed interest. Not to ban it. Not yet. But to understand it, before someone copies it. And this is where it gets even more complicated. Because while the FIA has no clear evidence of wrongdoing, the 2026 regulations are still in transition. Several enforcement protocols, especially around floor stiffness, energy recovery mapping, and battery cooling, are still being finalized. So anything Mercedes discovers now could be grandfathered in before the final technical directive lands. It's not about breaking the rules. It's about writing them before anyone else can. And Red Bull knows this. Sources near their powertrain division were reportedly furious after reviewing overnight data. Not because of Mercedes' speed, but because of how consistent their ERS deployment appeared under full load. Which shouldn't have been possible, given the battery configuration teams are currently limited to. If Mercedes has found a workaround, even a legal one, it could throw Red Bull's entire testing model into question. The irony? Ferrari may have triggered this entire chain of events. After focusing media attention on their radical risk with the SF26, they shifted the spotlight just long enough for Mercedes to work in the shadows. And in a sport where perception is half the battle, that silence gave Mercedes exactly what they needed: time. Time to test, time to mask performance, and time to get just far enough ahead before anyone realized what they were building. So now, the real tension isn't just about car performance. It's about who sets the boundaries. Because if Mercedes has once again found a way to stay inside the rulebook, while rewriting the chapters everyone else is still studying, then 2026 might not be decided on race pace. It could be decided right now, in the backrooms of Barcelona. Here's what no one is saying out loud, but everyone is starting to whisper. Mercedes may not be hiding just performance. They may be hiding the fact that they've already solved 2026. And if that's true, the biggest story from Barcelona isn't about who was fastest. It's about who looks lost, and who suddenly doesn't. Because when you speak to engineers around the paddock quietly, off the record, you begin to hear a strange consistency in the frustration. It's not just Mercedes' pace they're worried about. It's the idea that Mercedes arrived at testing not looking for answers, but simply validating them. That subtle shift, from searching to confirming, is the clearest sign a team has built something ahead of schedule. And in Formula One, that's the kind of advantage that only grows over time. There's also a deeper fear brewing, one that goes beyond testing metrics. Because if Mercedes is already exploiting a regulatory blind spot, whether it's in energy deployment, floor behavior, or rear suspension compliance, the FIA might be too late to stop it. You can't retroactively enforce what you didn't define. And the more political weight a team has, the more championships, the more influence, the harder it becomes to change the rules without admitting fault. That's why some insiders are calling this a quiet version of 2019 Ferrari. Except this time, there's no smoke, no noise, just clean data. And that silence is political. Because when Ferrari found a power unit loophole in 2019, the FIA's investigation ended with a confidential settlement. No punishments, no public findings, just a vague note about technical clarifications, and a whole grid left wondering how close they really want to get to the edge. If something similar is unfolding now with Mercedes, it could explain why no one's pressing too hard. Because if they win again, clean or not, it will be because everyone else hesitated right now. Meanwhile, Red Bull is watching everything. And not just from a performance angle, but from a political one. They know how the game works. They've played it better than anyone since 2021. But what they're seeing from Mercedes in Barcelona isn't desperation. It's control. And that control over strategy, over testing, over optics, is exactly what Red Bull used to dominate with. The fact that Mercedes might now be using the same playbook? That's what's making the paddock nervous. As for the FIA, their silence is just as calculated. No comments on Mercedes. No surprise checks. Instead, they're focusing on Hadjar's crash, on Red Bull's floor, on Ferrari's reliability. It's all noise. Necessary, distracting, strategic noise. Because if Mercedes really have found something legal, but fundamentally unfair, the FIA may be trying to buy time before they're forced to admit they missed it. And that brings us to the real issue. Not whether Mercedes is breaking rules, but whether they've once again become untouchable. Because history doesn't repeat itself in F1, it evolves. And if we're seeing the early signs of a new dominance forming, then this may be the last moment to stop it before the advantage becomes irreversible. If Mercedes really has unlocked something structural, something fundamental, then 2026 may already be tilting in their favor. And the other teams know it. Because in Formula One, it's not just about speed, it's about timing. And when a team reaches the performance ceiling before anyone else even identifies it, that's when titles are won before the lights go out in Bahrain. For Red Bull, this is more than a challenge. It's an existential threat. They've been the benchmark in floor-generated downforce since 2022. Their advantage came not just from aerodynamics, but from knowing where the limits were, and dancing right on the edge. But if Mercedes has now moved those limits, if they've redefined the aerodynamic balance under the new 2026 regs, then Red Bull's baseline is obsolete. And Verstappen's quiet frustration in the press pan may be the first public crack in the facade. Ferrari, meanwhile, is caught in a different kind of storm. The SF26 was meant to be a bold leap, a visual statement that Ferrari was done playing it safe. But now, that aggressiveness feels like a distraction. Because while they grabbed headlines with design innovation, Mercedes grabbed silence and data. And in F1, data wins races. If Ferrari doesn't pivot fast, they could find themselves with a beautiful machine that's already technically outdated. But the real wildcard here is the FIA. Because the longer they wait to issue formal technical clarifications, the deeper these advantages will set in. Remember 2020? When Racing Point's brake ducts mirrored Mercedes? It didn't matter whether it was legal, the political fallout poisoned the entire season. If something like that brews again, especially with Mercedes at the center, the FIA won't just be refereeing a race. They'll be managing a civil war. And let's not forget the supply chain. Smaller teams, Williams, Sauber, even Haas, rely on early clarity to plan their upgrades. If Mercedes is allowed to build freely in the current gray zone, those teams may lose months of development time chasing a moving target. The ripple effect isn't just technical. It's financial. It's strategic. And it could deepen the gap between front and back markers. Something the FIA explicitly wanted to avoid in 2026.